Hi everybody, it's Stay Thrive and welcome back to another video. Today I will be talking about Universality by Natasha Brown. So I would rate this book overall a 7.5 out of 10. This book was very different from the usual books that I go for. And at first the hypocrisy kind of annoyed me. I stuck it out until the end. Without further ado, I'm going to get into a summary and I'm also going to go over my thoughts of what I think the author was trying to communicate, points that stood out to me. There might be some spoilers in this video, so I suggest you read the book and then come back so that we can have a discussion. So Universality begins as a COVID lockdown rave where a group called the Universalists have an opening event to spread their self-sufficient community. Life and work is pointless. They feel like money is just an illusion, and they reject the ideal of identity politics. The group Universality was squatting on a wealthy banker's farmland, but the group's leader is nearly killed by Jake, who's an ex-member of Universality, and Jake also took the gold bar. From there, we get various perspectives of what ends up occurring. We get various perspectives of the different events leading up to that point. The first perspective was Hannah's article called A Fool's Gold. As we learn in Hannah's perspective, she is not very honest in her reporting. She kind of misshapes the facts so that she can create a more universal story and appeal to a more universal audience. But she does get fame for a short period of time and does get money from that. And that's where, the author kind of leaves her story. And then we hear Richard's perspective, Richard Spencer, who is the wealthy banker who owned the farmland and whose land was overtaken by the Universalists. From his perspective, here the perspective of both privilege and how it feels to lose your sense of privilege. So losing control and the status. And then lastly, we got Lenny's perspective, which to me, her story was the most complete, or her perspective was the most complete. So basically she was a provocative columnist. She had like an anti-woke agenda and also used a lot of buzzwords and bending of the truth as an opportunity to manipulate the masses. So that's how I would summarize the book. So next we're gonna go over like some points that I got out of the book. So what I got out of this book is when reaching the masses, using buzzwords and reaching them on like an emotional level with things such as fear is very effective and often weaponized. Lenny doesn't really seem to care about the message that she's spreading or spewing, and she actually kind of seems to despise her audience and people in general. She's very cynical. I think the book is titled Universality in that the author wants to highlight how being viewed as universal requires a sense of vagueness so that it's relatable and to the people, and people have a tendency to fill in with the vagueness with experiences of their own or their own perspective. So we as people tend to fill in when there is vagueness. I think it could be a critique of political figures too, and how they're vague, kind of general with the masses. I also think that the concept of universal in this book can mean multiple different things. I think it could mean how society can strive for universality without a full understanding of what that actually means. In a way, universality can create more division and more isolations for specific groups. I think the concept of universal is also referring to how people have universal desires, wants, fears, and how these universal ideals can be weaponized to manipulate audiences. I also did want to look at the cover to see what you guys thought about the cover. Sorry guys. All right, this is the cover of the book. So as you guys can see, the cover contains a gold bar with a face that I presume is probably Lenny, or like the lips of Lenny. So I think the gold bar represents what people want universally, which is wealth or resources, and we often despise others that have it. I think the face on the bar is to represent Lenny, or maybe even ourselves, and even though we despise those who have it, we view ourselves as worthy or deserving of it. Let me know y'all's thoughts. I'm not that artistic, so you know, sometimes the artwork goes above me. So yeah, overall, like I said, this book is pretty good, but some parts of the book did seem unfinished. As I said, we had three main perspectives: Hannah's, Richard Spencer's, and Lenny's. Hannah and Richard's perspective really weren't as developed as Lenny, if you ask me. For example, Hannah, it explored how she was being, you know, just authentic to achieve the fame and the fortune. But ultimately it led to Lenny having a bigger platform. And, you know, as we see in the story, Hannah is not, you know, for those views that Lenny is spewing. So I feel like it was a chance for either character development for Hannah, or perhaps just seeing more about Hannah's reaction, or like the impacts of her dishonesty on how it impacts Hannah. Like, it would have been interesting to go a little bit more into it, I think. And then Richard Spencer, he wasn't a very likable character, but hearing his point of view was important, because it did show the importance of accurate and, you know, more honest journalism. Because with Hannah's perspective from her article, he came across as a conspicuous spender who was all about self-benefit and just greedy in every aspect of his life. In his perspective, he did explain that he tried to communicate the truth to the media, but they didn't care. They didn't want to hear the truth, and they kind of already had made up their minds. So anything that he said, it was just kind of used against him for whatever the media wanted to portray. I think that hearing Richard Spencer's perspective gave more humanity to him. Though, you know, of course, there was still a certain level of privilege and selfishness in his actions. I do think it gave him a little bit more humanity. For Richard Spencer, it also just seemed like an abrupt ending. I would have definitely loved to see either Richard Spencer or Hannah challenge Lenny. But then again, I was watching a YouTuber called Bob the Bookkeeper, and he pointed out that Lenny is triumphant in the ending, and she actually comes out stronger, even though she's, you know, telling lies and skeeting past, you know, very serious questions. So the author was trying to basically point out that truth doesn't always prevail, as Bob the Bookkeeper pointed out. So I think, you know, that is a reasonable explanation for why Hannah and Richard Spencer didn't come after, but their ending did still seem a little abrupt. Another ending that seemed abrupt, even though we didn't get his perspective, the story of Jake, his story just seemed abrupt, and like it could have gone more into depth about certain things. Like throughout the book, it's kind of suggested, or it seems like he's having some kind of mental health crisis or mental unraveling. I definitely think something more could have been done with his story as well, whether that be going more into the dynamic between him and his mom, or like his mental health. I definitely think there could have been more with his story. Honestly, this book seems like it might be a series type of story, like this might be the first book. I don't know if the author has created a second book for this related to universality, but it seems like there's more to the story than what was presented. But overall, like I said, I did like the book, even though it, you know, it definitely took some effort for me to get through all of it. So yeah, let me know y'all's thoughts of the book and what you guys want me to read next in the comments below. See you guys next time. Bye.